Hey guys, tonight we drift far beyond the now, past skyscrapers, streetlights, and speed limits, until we land gently in the cradle of civilization. The land is dry, the rivers are wild, and your sandals are full of dust. You squint beneath a low Sumerian sun, and hear it before you see it. Laughter, music, the soft clink of ceramic cups, and the deep, unmistakable glug of beer being poured. Yes, that kind of beer. Tonight, you're stepping into ancient Kish, where taverns shape treaties, and the most powerful leader on record isn't a king, but a queen, with a jug of foamy diplomacy under her arm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk down a dusty path lined with reed houses and smell the yeast before anything else. Earthy, pungent, alive. Barley's been soaking in water all morning. Bread loaves, half-baked and crumbled, float in large clay pots where fermentation is already doing its bubbly work. This isn't just a drink. It's an offering, a ritual, a currency. And tonight, it's the tool of a queen. But she's not called that yet. Right now, she's just a woman behind a wooden counter, ladling beer into shallow bowls for merchants, messengers, and the occasional off-duty priest who insists he's only tasting for temple purity. Her name is Kubaba, and if you're lucky, she might pour you a cup laced with honey and a hint of mint, lean across the counter, and change the entire course of your city's political future. Because that's the thing about beer in ancient Sumer. It wasn't just a beverage. It was a binder, a smoother, a peacekeeper in a clay jar. This is around 2500 BCE. Give or take a few suspicious calendar adjustments. Cities like Kish, Uruk, and Logos are competing for dominance. Trade routes crisscross the landscape like thread. Gods have temples, kings have egos, and beer has power. Mainstream fact: the oldest known written recipe in the world is for beer. Cuneiform tablets from Sumer describe the ingredients, process, and rituals involved. It wasn't just about refreshment. It was sacred, tied to the goddess Ninkosi, who was essentially the Beyonk of brewing. But here's the twist. Brewing wasn't dominated by men, not even close. In Sumer, women brewed. They brewed at home. They brewed for the temples. They brewed in public houses that doubled as gathering places, negotiation halls, and, as in Kubaba's case, early state departments. So when you step into her tavern, it's not like walking into a medieval alehouse. There are no rowdy bards or swinging chandeliers. This place hums. The walls are mud brick and cool. The floor's been swept with a rush broom. Low tables are set with reed mats. And in the corner, a scribe cuffs something into a clay tablet, glancing up every so often to see who's drinking with whom. Because everything here matters. Who shares a drink? Who refills whose cup? Who laughs too loudly? Who never touches their bowl? Beer is watching. And Kubaba is watching too. She's not young, not old, just permanent. Like she's always been here. Like she knows your favorite mix before you've even sat down. And while her smile is soft, her eyes keep track of the tensions that others try to drown in barley foam. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Sumerian beer was so thick, people drank it with straws. Long, hollow reeds that doubled as status symbols. The fancier the straw, the more important you were. And if someone offered you theirs, that was basically an alliance proposal. Kubaba. She has the nicest straw in the room, woven with gold thread. A gift maybe, from a city governor who wanted favorable treatment in a land dispute. She uses it sparingly. Tonight, a traveling envoy has just arrived. He's dust-covered, sunburned, and clearly annoyed that he's not been offered the good beer yet. Kubaba smiles, gestures to a bench, and sends over a bowl, just warm enough to release the scent of barley and smoke. No need for words. He'll wait. Everyone does. And here's the cheeky historical question. How did she get here? How does a tavern-keeper, likely of modest means and uncertain lineage, eventually become Queen of Kish, the only woman ever listed in the Sumerian King List? Historians still argue whether she actually ruled, or if her name was added as posthumous flattery. Some suggest she was a regent. Others insist she was mythologized after death. But the records don't lie. Her name appears, alone, singular, sober. Kubaba, the woman tavern-keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king. Yes, king, because the word for ruler didn't have a feminine form. But don't let the grammar fool you. She wielded power, and it started here, with beer. You sip from your own bowl now, the barley tang settling behind your teeth, and glance around. Deals are being made. Disputes are being dissolved. Kubaba moves from table to table, pouring, listening, smiling just enough. You might not survive the water in Sumer, but you'd be foolish not to trust the beer, especially hers. The tavern door doesn't creak. It sighs. Clay and wood don't age silently in Sumer. They settle like old bones under the weight of time. You're back inside, seated at the edge of a worn bench, watching the woman who doesn't yet call herself queen, but might as well. Kubaba moves like someone who already knows how the conversation will end. She doesn't hurry. She doesn't command. She simply fills. Bowls, silences, tensions. Every gesture is an invitation to breathe. Even when her customers come armed with swords, scrolls, or stress, they somehow leave with slightly more clarity and slightly less vinegar in their blood. Her tavern isn't large, just a single long room with one hearth, 2 storage jars, and a back storeroom that might also double as a sleeping mat. There are no windows, just 2 wide openings near the ceiling for light and breeze, and a tiny shrine to Ninkasi set into a niche near the back wall. A reed doll stands inside it, arms raised as if in permanent toast. The scent inside? Earthy, sharp, sweet like soggy bread left too long in the sun. Only this time, it's intentional. Let's talk about the beer itself. Mainstream historical fact. Sumerian beer wasn't filtered. It was cloudy, grainy, and came in more textures than you might expect from a liquid. Some versions were porridge thick. Others were more like broth. Most required straws. Yes, drinking your way to the bottom required both patience and upper body strength. And the fermentation process, delightfully improvised. The standard method involved crumbling loaves of half-baked bread, called papir, into water, letting it sit in large clay vessels, and stirring it with whatever clean stick you had on hand. Add dates for sweetness, or honey, if you were flush that week. Kubaba's version is better. That's the general consensus among her regulars. She uses toasted barley. She infuses herbs. And she ages it just long enough to give it an edge without tipping over into vinegar. If beer were music, hers would be a lullaby with a knife tucked under the chorus. Which is why her tavern has become more than a place to drink. It's become a place to think. You glance at the table to your left. A merchant from Adab is negotiating with a temple scribe from Logos. Their conversation is tense, but civil, mostly because Kubaba is pouring their refills herself. Every time a voice rises, she arrives with a ladle. Every time a fist twitches, she offers a sweetened bowl. And slowly, the tempo drops. The shoulders relax. The deal begins to take shape. This is her gift. And it's not just charisma. It's architecture. The tavern is arranged so that rivals sit close, but not too close. The corner table is reserved for those with something to hide. The stool near the door is for those in a hurry to storm back out. Every seat has a purpose. Every pour, a message. Here's a quirky detail. Some scholars believe ancient taverns were one of the few places where classes mingled. Unlike temples or palaces, a beer house didn't care if you wore silk or rags, only that you could pay. And sometimes, not even that. Kubaba ran hers like a social algorithm. Farmers, traders, priests, scribes, couriers. You could find them all here. And if you watched long enough, you'd notice how she paired people. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Like stirring honey into warm liquid, everyone eventually dissolves into the mix. You lean forward, noticing a young man nervously fingering a clay token. He's new. Probably a messenger. Maybe carrying news from Kubaba steps near, sets down a bowl, and says nothing. Just looks at him, long enough for him to lower the token, sip his beer, and decide to wait until tomorrow to deliver his message. Power, wielded gently. Outside, the streets of Kish buzz with activity. Oxen bray, priests chant, traders argue over copper. But inside, the tavern hums differently. It's slower, softer, safer. Kubaba doesn't need guards. She has hospitality, which in this era is practically divine law. Hospitality in Sumer was sacred. Deny someone water, and you might as well spit in Enlil's face. Offer someone bread and beer, and you established more than goodwill. You established contract. Real contracts, too. Deals could be sealed with a shared bowl more effectively than a stamped tablet. That's why Kubaba's place matters, because if you make the beer, and you control who shares it, then you get to decide which alliances form, and which fall apart before they ever solidify. Historians still debate whether Kubaba's tavern was officially sanctioned by the temple, or whether she simply built her network out of nothing but barley and nerve. Some say she had powerful friends early on. Others believe she gained influence one bowl at a time. Either way, her reputation grew. Envoys began to request her by name. Messages arrived asking, "Is the tavern woman available to mediate?" Rival leaders sent gifts. The governor once tried to send her gold. She returned it with a note carved on a piece of driftwood. Send clean jars instead. Iconic. And that's how it started. Not with bloodlines, not with conquest, but with conversation, with foam, with ritual. You sip again. The bowl is warm now. The last of the barley has settled into the bottom in a soft cloud. Outside, Kish glows gold under the setting sun. But here in this room, time has slowed. Voices have softened. And a woman with a straw woven from river reeds is rewriting what power looks like, one pore at a time. The Sumerian King List is not a light read. It's a brick of baked clay, covered in cuneiform, and full of names that echo with the weight of bronze and battle. Kings who ruled for 1,000 years, which may or may not have been a humble exaggeration. Cities that rose and fell like sunbeams, and power measured in floods, famines, and footnotes. But nestled inside this long, boastful list is a single anomaly, a name that doesn't roar, but lingers. Kubaba. She appears once. No royal lineage, no inherited crown, just Kubaba, the woman tavern-keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish. Then nothing else. No grand battles, no mythologized lovers, no mention of war chariots or divine visions. Just a single, bewildering line that has haunted historians for centuries. Because this list doesn't do women, which is to say, it doesn't usually acknowledge them. The Sumerian King List, carved in multiple iterations over generations, was meant to convey legitimacy, a sacred chain of rulers blessed by the gods. And in that long, testosterone-heavy daisy chain, only one woman appears. No footnote, no caveat, just Kubaba. And here's the wild thing. She's not even described as queen. She's called king, because the Sumerians didn't have a separate term for female rulers. You either ruled, or you didn't. Grammar could catch up later. So how did she get on the list? Historians still argue whether Kubaba's inclusion was a political compromise, a scribal accident, or evidence that her reign was so undeniable, so deeply respected, that the record keepers had no choice. Some believe she was inserted long after her death as a symbolic gesture, perhaps a nod to an older oral tradition. Others point to records in temple archives hinting at a period of unusual peace and prosperity under her watch, a time when treaties lasted, trade routes thrived, and taxes arrived on time, all suspicious signs of competent leadership. And then there's the beer. Because, let's be clear, beer wasn't just a beverage. It was identity. It was ritual. It was tax. Many scholars believe that Kubaba's brewing and distribution network became so vital to the region's economy that not including her would have left a massive, foamy hole in the narrative. You imagine the scribe pressing a reed stylus into clay. He reaches the 19th ruler of Kish. He's already written 12 names that start with N. He's tired. He's sweating. And now he has to carve that name. Kubaba, the tavern-keeper. He hesitates, looks around. No one stops him. So he keeps going. And thus, a woman who stirred mash and soothed enemies with bowls of fermented barley becomes immortal. It's worth noting that in Sumerian society, women had more legal standing than in many later civilizations. They could own property, manage businesses, even initiate divorce. But rule, that was still rare, almost unthinkable. Almost. Kubaba wasn't just accepted, she was celebrated. A quirky side note. Some tablets refer to her in poetic phrases like she who smooths the bitter tongue, or Lady of the Golden Foam. These might sound like cocktail names, but in Sumer that was serious praise. So, what exactly did she do? According to some interpretations, She didn't seize power. She absorbed it. Her tavern became a hub of soft governance. Minor disputes settled over bowls of brew. Trade routes negotiated at her benches. Tribute collected in jars rather than threats. Over time, she began to issue recommendations, then decrees, then orders, and people listened because her rule didn't feel like conquest. It felt like common sense. You can picture the moment. A crisis. A neighboring city insults Kish. The local governor fumbles a response. The council turns to Kubaba, who's standing behind the bar with her ladle mid-pour. She sighs, sets it down, and says, "Invite them to drink. We'll pour honey into the bowl and see who stirs it." Problem solved. Not with weapons, with wisdom. That was her gift. She didn't shout. She poured. Did she have guards? Probably not. But she had loyalty. Did she wear a crown? Hard to say. But she wore the scent of toasted grain and river mint like an aura. Did she command armies? No evidence of that. But if peace lasted longer under her rule than under 20 spear-wielding monarchs, who's counting? And yet, some still doubt, because her name is inconvenient. It disrupts the myth of uninterrupted male leadership. It complicates the idea that only kings shaped history. It leaves us with questions. Why her? Why then? Why beer? Scholars point to a cultural shift in Kish during her time. A move from territorial posturing to economic partnership. A reduction in raids. A spike in intercity marriages. All of which suggests some leader, was prioritizing diplomacy. Kubaba was the only new variable, and perhaps her greatest achievement wasn't her reign, but her restraint. She didn't raise cities. She didn't declare divine parentage. She didn't rename the months after herself. She just ruled, like a brewer balancing sweetness and bite. And the proof, it's in the cup. You take another sip. The barley has settled. The foam has flattened. But the aftertaste, that lingers. Like her name on that list, the temple's shadow falls long across the square now, the ziggurat turning gold in the fading light. You're still in Kish, and the hum of city life has quieted, replaced by the low murmur of evening offerings and the soft clink of jugs. Somewhere nearby, a priestess sings a hymn to Ninkosi, the goddess of beer, her voice rising like steam from a clay pot. The scent of barley mash is in the air. Again. But tonight, you're not in the tavern. You followed Kubaba somewhere else. A side alley. A quieter courtyard. A place not marked on any official map, but known by everyone who mattered. This is the brewery, or more precisely, the brewhouse shrine, where making beer becomes indistinguishable from making prayer. Because in Sumer, beer wasn't just a drink, it was sacred. Mainstream historical fact, beer was routinely used in religious rituals. Offerings to the gods included bread, grain, and cups of fresh brew. Entire hymns were dedicated to its preparation. The most famous, the hymn to Ninkosi, which is less about praise and more of a full-blown, step-by-step recipe disguised as worship. You stand near a clay basin where barley floats like sleepy fish. There's a woman stirring it with a wooden paddle, whispering softly, not to you, to the mixture, or maybe to Ninkosi. Hard to say. Kubaba arrives moments later, not dressed like a ruler, but like a brewer. Linen robe, hair tied back, forearms dusted with flour and ash. She nods to the women working, then kneels by a sealed pot. She places her hand on it, palm flat. She's waiting, because the mash ferments at its own pace, not by force, not by schedule, just when it's ready. This is where diplomacy begins, not in scrolls, not in speeches, but here, in this damp, fragrant room, where the city's next big alliance is currently bubbling beneath a cracked lid. You might not think of brewers as policy makers, but Kubaba did. She knew that every guest who drank from her bowl was tasting her judgment, her timing, her discretion. She chose the mix. She adjusted the balance. She set the tone of every gathering before the first words were ever spoken. Quirky tidbit. Beer offerings to the gods were often made alongside incense and song. In some temples, the priests tasted the beer before setting it on the altar, ostensibly to ensure its quality, but also, let's be honest, to avoid wasting the good stuff on gods who couldn't file complaints. Kubaba took this seriously. She didn't brew for flavor. She brewed for effect. Need someone calmed? Add date syrup. Need them alert? Serve the sharper batch. Hosting a peace talk. Mix a bit of honey to coat the tongue and smooth the insults. Historians still debate whether Kubaba invented her own recipes or simply perfected traditional ones. Some suggest she introduced filtration. Others believe she was the first to use herbs for mood setting. But all agree, something in her brew changed everything. It made people stay. And that was her genius. In a time when rulers shouted from ziggurats and carved their achievements into stone, Kubaba worked in whispers and vapor. She poured her influence into clay jugs and let it ferment, and people returned, again and again. Because here's the secret. Most politics in Sumer didn't happen in courtrooms. They happened in kitchens, in courtyards, in these backroom breweries, where the beer wasn't just a drink, but a message. Imagine two rivals seated across from each other, too proud to speak. Then Kubaba enters, serves them both from the same vessel, and says, "This beer came from the first harvest of barley grown along the border you both claim." Now that's diplomacy. She didn't arbitrate. She created context. A shared drink, a shared history, a shared buzz. You watch as the pot lid is lifted. The scent hits you, warm, sour, almost sweet. It's not finished, but it's close. The room shifts. Kubaba nods. Tomorrow, this brew will be served in her tavern. Tomorrow, an envoy from a rival city will drink it and agree to delay his army's advance. Tomorrow, a scribe will write, "Peace held, for reasons unclear." But tonight, it just bubbles. Outside, a bell rings. Priests call for evening prayers. Somewhere, children laugh. And in this brewhouse, where steam clings to the ceiling and silence feels like respect, Kubaba rises, brushes flour from her robe, and smiles. She doesn't need to speak. She's already said everything in the cup. You turn to leave, but not before glancing at the tiny idol of Ninkosi perched on the shelf. Its eyes are smudged, its smile faded, but its hands, still raised in praise. In the hands of other rulers, beer was an offering. In Kubaba's, it was an instrument. And tomorrow, it will shape peace. Again, you step back into the open streets of Kish as dawn spills slowly over the rooftops, turning every mud brick golden and soft-edged. A breeze stirs dust into lazy spirals. Merchants begin to open their stalls, A boy walks by with a bundle of leeks. Somewhere, someone sneezes, and a dog barks once in sympathy. And through it all, there's the distant, familiar scent. Beer. Again. But this time, it's everywhere. Not just from Kubaba's tavern, but from rooftops, basins, public squares. This is brewing day. And in Kish, brewing isn't just a household task. It's an urban rhythm. You follow it toward the market. Women squat beside clay vats, checking the grain. Men carry baskets of crushed bread loaves to communal vats. Children run messages between houses, sometimes tasting the foam if no one's looking. It's busy, yes, but also sacred. This isn't just about thirst. It's about connection. Sumerian civilization, after all, was built not just with bricks and bronze, but with barley. Mainstream historical fact: barley was the economic backbone of Mesopotamia. It was currency, food, tribute, and beer base. Farmers were paid in grain. Workers fed with grain. Temples filled with it. And cities like Kish, they ran on it. The shift to urban life, actual cities, not just clustered huts, was powered, in part, by the ability to store and redistribute grain efficiently. That meant fewer people had to farm and more could specialize. And that, in turn, meant beer, because beer was how you made barley portable, potable, and, let's be honest, enjoyable. And guess who understood this better than anyone? You guessed it. Kubaba. She watched the flow of barley from harvest to kitchen to tax jar. She understood how much was owed to the temple, how much could be traded, how much spoiled in storage, and how best to transform the surplus into something with value. Not just flavor, but leverage. That's the quiet trick of ancient brewing. It turned excess into opportunity. A field yielded too much grain. Turn it into beer and trade it. A tax shipment arrived early. Host a feast with it and build alliances. A caravan delayed, serve them a sample of your city's brew, and they'll remember it more than the scroll they came with. Kubaba had a map in her head, not of borders or armies, but of relationships, and every link on that map was greased with beer. It said she once brokered a trade between two rival cities, simply by offering each a different flavor of the same brew, and letting them argue over which was superior. They spent hours praising her. By the time they remembered their original dispute, it didn't matter anymore. That wasn't manipulation. It was marination. Quirky tidbit. Beer wasn't just served warm or room temperature. Some households chilled their beer by placing pots in shallow pools of water, where evaporative cooling worked its quiet magic. Kubaba. She had a shaded alcove in her tavern built just for this. A clever trick that made her drink feel more refreshing, and perhaps more divine. Today, she's inspecting her own delivery of barley. She doesn't do this often anymore, not personally. But something about this batch matters. She rubs a handful between her palms, lets the dust coat her fingers, then lifts it to her nose. Satisfied. A scribe stands nearby, stylus ready. She nods once. He records the weight. You're watching the Queen of Kish approve a shipment. Except she's not wearing a crown. She's not flanked by guards. She's not shouting orders. She's just standing in the middle of a square, holding grain. Historians still debate when, exactly, she became queen. There's no coronation record, no triumphal tablet, no dramatic ascension, just a gradual shift in language. First Lady. then governor, then king. Some argue she never formally ruled, that she was simply so essential to the city's functioning that people began treating her like royalty, that the King List reflects perception more than fact. Others say she ruled in every sense that mattered, and just skip the formality. Because Kish was a city of practical people, they respected results, and Kubaba delivered. Barley yields improved, trade increased, disputes decreased, more temples held steady offerings, and yes, the beer was exceptional. You wander past the granaries now, great domed structures lined with reeds and stacked jars, each marked with a stamp, each bearing the name of the family, temple, or governor who contributed. And near the back, a row of jugs with a single name, Kubaba, stamped not with a title, just a signature, but everyone knows what it means. Her beer funds temple repairs. Her beer welcomes emissaries. Her beer ensures no one leaves Kish thinking was inhospitable. Because in this city, diplomacy doesn't wear armor. It wears foam. The sun climbs higher, baking the bricks and sharpening the edges of shadows. You follow a procession, not official, not grand, but clearly organized. Men in linen tunics, women with braids threaded in copper, and one older man carrying a wide bowl on his head, carefully balancing its contents like a priest might cradle an idol. What's in the bowl? You already know. Beer. But this isn't just another drink run. This is ceremonial. You trail behind them as they pass the ziggurat, wind through the central market, and arrive at a house that looks plain on the outside, but the people gathered inside speak volumes. These are temple scribes, local officials, elders, a few traders, no bodyguards, no spears, just low tables, reed mats, and the quiet gravity of people here to decide something important. Kubaba arrives last. She's not announced. She's not flanked by advisors. She walks in, nods once, and takes her place at the head of the circle. The bowl is placed at her feet. She lifts it and pours. One cup, then another, passed in clockwise rhythm. Everyone waits. No one drinks until she sits again. Then they all raise their cups and sip. No toast, no speech, just silence and the soft, shared hum of barley warming the throat. This is how peace is made, not with a signature, with a sip. Mainstream historical fact: beer was often used to ratify agreements in ancient Mesopotamia. From land sales to marriages, sharing a drink wasn't just symbolic, it was binding. The act of drinking together from the same batch signified trust, mutual benefit, and divine witness. Kubaba understood this at a core level. She didn't need a written charter. She brewed one. And that's what's happening here. The dispute? Minor. A water channel diverted. A tax shipment delayed. But left unchecked, it could spiral into something worse. The kind of thing that ends in sharp words and sharper spears. Instead, barley, yeast, patience. You glance around the room. Each person here represents a thread in the city's web. Their robes aren't fancy, but their opinions are weighted. And Kubaba knows every one of them. She's served their families, brokered their marriages, bailed out their debt. She doesn't hold power over them. She holds it with them. That's the difference. And that's what made her reign possible. She wasn't born into power. She brewed her way there. One deal, one drink, one diplomatic pour at a time. Quirky tidbit. The Sumerians believed that beer didn't just please the gods, it revealed their moods. A good batch was seen as divine favor, a spoiled one, bad omen. Some priestesses even read the foam for signs, like tea leaves, looking for bubbles shaped like birds or snakes. Kubaba. She didn't divine the future. She just shaped it. Quietly. Consistently. You watch as the men and women at the table begin to talk, not debate, just talk. Calm voices. Occasional chuckles. A scribal assistant fetches more bowls. Someone offers a slice of date cake. The mood has shifted. No one's raised a counteroffer yet, but you can feel it in the room. This issue is going to dissolve like barley in warm water. Because how do you argue when your lips still taste honey and mint? Historians still argue whether Kubaba had official legal authority. There's no surviving decree with her seal, no army records, but there are outcomes recorded on adjacent tablets and trade logs, border conflicts that stopped, markets that merged, alliances that endured far longer than expected, and they all trace back to beer, her beer, more specifically, her ceremonies. Because this wasn't a tavern scene anymore. This was a ritual. These gatherings had structure, purpose, trust. They were known throughout Kish as the circle of the cup. No shouting aloud, no posturing, only one rule. You don't interrupt the pour. Once, a younger official tried. Mid-discussion, he stood, raised his voice, and pointed a finger across the circle. Kubaba didn't flinch. She refilled his cup. Then hers. Then everyone else's. Then poured his again. Last, he sat, and never interrupted again. There's a difference between power and presence. Kubaba had both, and she used them like a brewer uses grain. Not all at once, but steadily, stirring, waiting, watching for the moment when bitterness can become balance. You look again at the bowl. It's nearly empty. The dispute is resolved. The decision made. The scribe records it, not in ink, but in clay, with neat rows of cuneiform that begin, as always, with the date and the names of the witnesses. And at the bottom, just two symbols, barley and a bowl. Enough said. Outside, the light has softened. Children chase shadows through the alleys. A woman laughs as she fans a fire. You hear a flute somewhere, playing a tune you can't quite follow. And behind you, in that quiet room where a queen once brewed peace, someone refills their cup and whispers, to the woman who never needed a throne. Evening presses its warm hand across Kish, and the sky shifts into apricot and ash. You follow Kubaba once again, not to the tavern, not to the brewhouse, but to a place few people in the city would expect her to go, a private home. Not hers, not a palace, a modest structure with a small courtyard shaded by fig trees. You step through the narrow doorway and find yourself in the company of contradiction, a high priest, a known drunk, and a copper merchant who once tried to cheat the temple out of 3 sacks of barley. They're laughing. Well, not laughing so much as chuckling cautiously, like people who know the room is more complicated than the mood allows. Kubaba sits in the middle of them. No throne, no platform, just a low stool with a ceramic cup resting on her knee. She isn't speaking. She's listening. A lot. But when she does speak, they listen back. And this is the heart of her strategy. Because diplomacy, for Kubaba, didn't happen in grand halls. It happened here, over cracked bowls, between shared glances, in the margins of formality. Mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian cities were governed by overlapping powers, temples, councils, merchant guilds, and the palace. Influence wasn't linear. It was a web, a negotiation. And Kubaba knew how to pull the threads just enough to shift the center without snapping the system. She didn't break tradition. She fermented it. Tonight, they're discussing land. Specifically, who owns the field near the canal where barley spoils every third harvest. It's a dry topic, literally. But in Kish, nothing involving water rights is ever simple. And once again, beer is the medium. Each man here has his own cup. Each cup is poured from the same jug. And that's the symbol. Same brew, same sauce, same steak. Even the drunk, the ex-governor who lost his title after failing to deliver temple grain, sits straighter when Kubaba refills his cup. He knows it's not just beer. It's an invitation back to usefulness. A reminder, you can be part of the solution again, if you drink it right. Quirky tidbit. The Sumerians believed that beer had healing properties, not just physically, but socially. A cup could mend a grudge. A well-shared bowl could soften a feud. One tablet even describes beer as the liquid of forgetting and forgiving. It sounds poetic, until you remember some versions were nearly 10% alcohol. Kubaba probably knew the risks. Too much, and tempers fray. Too little, and pride stays rigid. But just enough. That sweet spot between sharpness and surrender. That's where trust grows. She doesn't rush the conversation. She lets it simmer. The priest speaks first, offering a solution that leans heavily toward the temple. The copper merchant grimaces, sips. The drunk mumbles something about flood cycles, and everyone pretends to consider it. Then Kubaba lifts her hand, not high, just enough, and says, "The barley can grow where the canal feeds. The water belongs to the gods. The work belongs to the people. The yield is shared. You each take 1/3. The city takes the rest." No one argues. Not out of fear, out of relief. Because she said what none of them could. Not because they didn't have the words, but because they didn't have the distance. Kubaba stands slightly outside the power structures, but inside every conversation. That's her brilliance. She's not a priest, not a merchant, not a soldier. She doesn't owe any faction. She just brews. And in that brewing, she's made herself necessary. Historians still argue whether she was formally appointed to this role. Some suggest she was an elected intermediary. Others believe she carved her position out of sheer inevitability, showing up again and again until people stopped asking if she belonged and started asking when she'd arrive. She never declared authority. She became it by being the person who always knew how to listen, who always poured evenly, who always left the last sip for someone else. That was her throne, the edge of the mat, the jug in hand. And now, as the conversation softens into story swapping and shared dates, she leans back, stretches her legs, and smiles, not big, just enough. She knows the work isn't done. The next issue is already waiting. A border skirmish, a jealous widow, a batch of spoiled grain passed off as temple worthy. But for now, the field near the canal will grow barley again. because the people who were once willing to fight over it just drank from the same jug and laughed over the same joke about donkeys and taxes. You walk out with her into the night. The street is empty, quiet except for the creak of a cart somewhere far off. The moon hangs low, heavy with the weight of witness. Kubaba doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She knows this. Tomorrow, people will say the priest made the decision, or the council, or maybe the gods. But you know the truth. It was her hand on the jug, her beer in the bowl, and her silence that filled the room when the talking stopped. It's early now, sun barely cresting the horizon, Kish still holding its breath between night and noise. Most of the city is asleep. Even the dogs are too tired to argue. But you're up, and so is Kubaba. She's standing in the courtyard of her tavern, barefoot on the cool stone. There's a reed basket in one hand, and her other is sifting through sprigs of coriander and fresh mint. Morning light brushes her cheek. You half expect her to speak to the herbs, but she doesn't. She's preparing a batch, not for customers, not for ritual, for someone important. A man is arriving today, not a local official, not a temple priest, a foreign power broker from Mari, or maybe even Ebla, cities to the west, where people wear taller hats and longer tunics and bring messages that never travel alone. Kubaba's tavern has a reputation now, not just in Kish, not just among traders. Word has spread that here, in this quiet house, where the floor is always swept and the barley never burns, disputes are dissolved over a drink poured without judgment. So today, the table is set with intention. 3 bowls, 1 jug, no guards. Because here's the trick. The moment you post guards, it's no longer hospitality, it's posturing. And Kubaba isn't interested in posturing. She's interested in influence. Mainstream historical fact. Diplomatic envoys in Mesopotamia often traveled with small entourages and exchanged gifts that ranged from livestock to lapis lazuli to, you guessed it, ceremonial beer. These weren't just niceties. They were coded messages. A beer too warm? You're not welcome. A beer too sweet? You're being courted. A beer laced with spice? You're being warned. Kubaba. She plays the recipe like a harp. She knows what this envoy needs. Not flattery. Not strength. Stability. So the beer today is earthy, subtle, and balanced with mint. Something cool. Something that says, we are not your threat. We are your anchor. She prepares it herself. Because this bowl cannot be delegated. You watch as the envoy arrives. All polished sandals and practiced smiles. He bows once, too deep to be real. Kubaba nods and gestures him inside. No fanfare. No long introductions. Just a bowl set before him, with the faintest hint of steam. He lifts it, sniffs, then sips. He nods. A conversation begins. You can't hear the words, not clearly, but you don't need to. The language is older than speech. The lean of the shoulders, the rate of sipping, the way Kubaba waits between questions, letting the beer do part of the talking. The envoy offers silver. She waves it away. Not rudely, just firmly. What she wants isn't coin. It's clarity. Quirky tidbit. In some Mesopotamian cities, peace deals were ratified not with signatures, but with mutual toasts. A shared bowl implied mutual interest and mutual responsibility. If either party broke the deal, they didn't just offend the other. They offended the gods who witnessed the pour. That's why Kubaba insists on the jug being present the entire time. It isn't just a drink. It's evidence. It's accountability. It's the fourth guest at the table. They speak for over an hour. The envoy grows less stiff, his questions less guarded. Finally, he pulls a small clay tablet from his satchel, marked with the seal of his city's ruler. An agreement of some kind, likely trade. Grain in exchange for tin. Routes through Kish in exchange for safe passage east. Kubaba doesn't sign it. She doesn't have to. She lifts the jug and pours. First for him, then for herself, then for the third bowl, the one that sat untouched. She places it in the middle of the table. To the road, she says. That's all. And that's enough. Historians still debate whether Kubaba ever sent emissaries of her own. There's no surviving record of envoys from Kish signed with her seal, but there are suspicious patterns. Peaceful periods, sudden bursts of trade, agreements that align with no known royal decree, but always follow a visit to that tavern. Some believe she functioned as Kish's unofficial Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Others think she simply knew how to read people. But everyone agrees. No major decision happened without her. And that's the quiet brilliance of it all. Kubaba didn't announce her influence. She infused it. Like mint in warm beer. It doesn't shout. It cools. The envoy rises. He doesn't bow this time. He offers his hand. She doesn't take it. She just nods. They understand each other now. He leaves. And when he does, Kubaba lifts the third bowl, the one she poured for the road, and pours it into the earth near the doorstep. An offering. To travel. To trust. To the part of diplomacy that never makes it onto a tablet. Outside, the city stirs. The day begins. Another dispute, another batch. Another quiet pour that might very well change history. But you've seen enough for now. Because here, in this shaded room, with nothing but clay bowls, and a jug that never overflows, you've just watched an empire pivot. And it smelled faintly of barley and mint. It's midday in Kish now, and the city is humming at full tilt. The stone streets are hot enough to sizzle spilled wine. Oxen groan in the shade. Traders shout across stalls piled high, with dyed wool, dried figs, copper tools, and ceramic amulets shaped like fish or fertility gods. But you're not here to shop. You're here to follow a tablet. Not a glowing screen, but a hunk of clay, fresh from the scribe's bench, still damp at the corners. It's small, rectangular, and packed with cuneiform, so tight it looks like the tablet's been fingerprinted by a very anxious librarian. The top line reads, Kubaba, not just her name, her mark, her approval. This isn't a law. It's a ledger. A beer ledger. Because in Sumer, beer wasn't just for drinking, it was for accounting. Mainstream historical fact. Thousands of ancient Mesopotamian tablets have been unearthed detailing beer production and distribution. These were administrative records, grain rations, deliveries, temple offerings. Beer was central to the economy, and Sumerians tracked it with obsessive precision. If it was brewed, it was documented. And in Kubaba's case, this documentation became something more. You follow the scribe, a teenager with ink-stained hands and a stylus tucked behind his ear. He's on delivery, heading to the temple warehouse. The tablet he carries isn't a receipt. It's propaganda. Let's explain. Kubaba had beer branded. Not literally, no logos or jingles, but conceptually. Her batches became known for consistency. Her tavern gained a reputation, and the clay tablets began reflecting their prestige. This beer was brewed under the blessing of Lady Kubaba. This delivery is marked with the seal of the golden bowl. This barley is measured by the temple scale, affirmed by the tavern woman. Her name became shorthand for trust. That's branding, Mesopotamian style. And it worked. Her ledgers were copied. Her portions mimicked. Her formula, or at least her approach, began appearing in other cities. Some even sent scribes to learn from her. Kubaba's brewery was becoming an institution, and this worried people. Because when one woman's signature starts appearing on half the city's most reliable beer shipments, someone's going to get twitchy. Specifically, the palace. Historians still debate how much tension existed between Kubaba and Kish's royal family. Some say she rose after a dynasty collapsed. Others argue she ruled alongside a weak line of kings, quietly doing the actual work, while they staged festivals and argued about omens. One thing is clear: Kubaba's reach extended beyond the tavern. Take the beer tokens, small circular clay discs, each marked with a symbol: a jar, a jug, a bowl. These were exchanged like coins. One token equal one drink. But the tokens from her tavern, they carried extra value. People kept them, not as currency, as talismans. A merchant might hang one near his stall for prosperity. A bride might place one near her oven. One tablet even records a mother burying a beer token under her baby's crib to protect the child from sourness. That's more than marketing. That's mythology. You arrive at the temple storehouse just as the scribe places the tablet into a clay shelf among dozens of others. Each tablet is a square of narrative. Each tells who brewed, when, where, and for whom. Kubaba's line glows among the rest. Not literally, of course, but the priest inspecting it grunts in approval and sets it aside for priority distribution. Her batches get better placements. Her records get faster copying. Her name whispered down grain corridors and into merchant mouths becomes more than a name. It becomes reliability incarnate. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe the idea of beer grades began in Sumer, with terms like strong beer, good beer, and beer for the gods. Kubaba's batches were often labeled sweet beer, but not for sugar content, for mood. It made people agreeable. Agreeable people don't start wars. They sign treaties. So while kings might raise armies, Kubaba raised barrels, and arguably got more done, because no one wants to march with a hangover. Her clay tablets also served another purpose. They erased doubt. In a society without universal literacy, tablets acted as trust anchors, and Kubaba's name on one meant the drink inside wouldn't turn sour, and the deal it sealed wouldn't unravel in 3 days' time. You linger near the storehouse as a second scribe copies her original tablet onto a thinner strip of clay. This one will be baked, hardened, and placed in the city's archives, a permanent record of a temporary brew. And isn't that something? A drink that disappears, but its effects carefully preserved. Its taste gone, but its influence etched. That's the paradox of beer diplomacy. The moment is fleeting. The record is not. Kubaba understood this. She never gave speeches. She left tablets. She never led parades. She left protocols. She never told people what to believe. She brewed something they could trust. And now you walk away from the storehouse with dust on your sandals and a strange sense of awe for a woman who turned yeast into legacy. Because in Sumer, where floods erased cities and kings vanished with the turn of a clay wheel, the one thing that endured was a good batch, with her name at the top. The heat has started to retreat now. Kish exhales. Its people slow their steps, and the city settles into the golden haze of late afternoon. You find yourself back in the tavern, not bustling with business, but softly humming with presence. A quiet kind of fullness, the kind that doesn't demand attention, only holds it. And there, seated by the wall, is Kubaba. She's not speaking. She's not brewing. She's just being. There's a plate of dates at her side, half eaten, and a shallow bowl of beer she's barely touched. But the space around her is dense with gravity, as if everything you thought about leadership is being politely asked to step outside and reconsider. Because by now, Kubaba isn't just a tavern-keeper, not just a brewer, not even a queen in the traditional sense. She's something else entirely. A symbol, a myth, and myths in Sumer have a tendency to go divine. Mainstream historical fact. Kubaba was eventually deified. Later civilizations, including the Hittites and even early Greeks, referred to her as a goddess, sometimes of protection, sometimes of sovereignty, sometimes of gates or thresholds, but always with a faint, barley-scented echo of her origins. How did that happen? How does a woman who once scrubbed yeast from clay jars become the subject of prayers? It starts, as many strange things do, with stories, and Sumerians were excellent storytellers. You can imagine the first tale told. A young merchant, nervous, caught in a trade dispute, served a strange brew by the tavern woman. 3 sips in, the rival offers his hand. Problem solved. Coin exchanged. Grain delivered. That beer was blessed, he tells his wife later. Then the priestess of Ninkosi hears the tale and thinks, blessed, perhaps, or brewed by one touched by the divine. A seed is planted. The next time someone drinks Kubaba's beer and feels especially eloquent, she makes your tongue wise. When a child is born after a long bout of infertility, and the mother had visited Kubaba's tavern 3 days before, she blesses the womb. When a quarrel dissolves after a long meal shared under her roof, she pacifies anger. One by one, little fictions take root, watered by memory fermented in nostalgia. Quirky tidbit. In Hittite tradition, Kubaba or Kubaba in their tongue was regarded as a protective deity, often depicted with a mirror or pomegranate, symbols of wisdom and fertility. Some versions show her seated on a throne, calmly observing the world with a drink in hand. Yes, a drink. Even in heaven, she didn't put down the bowl. Back in Kish, the stories spread fast. She never claimed divinity. That would have been arrogant, dangerous. But she didn't deny the murmurs either. She simply kept brewing. She poured. And the more she poured, the more people began to wonder. Maybe she was different. Maybe that peace treaty wouldn't have held without her. Maybe that plague that didn't reach Kish was thanks to her protective rituals. Maybe that soldier who left for war and returned untouched had carried one of her barley tokens with him. Historians still argue whether Kubaba encouraged the deification or if it happened after her death. Some say she adopted small rituals, lighting incense at her brew shelf, placing flower petals in the fermentation jars, not as worship, but as anticipation. Others claim it was political, that the temple, realizing how much influence she wielded, decided it was safer to sanctify her than compete with her. A divine ally is less threatening than a powerful mortal. Either way, the shift was subtle. Kubaba, Lady of Kish. Kubaba, the peacemaker. Kubaba, the brewer of clarity. Kubaba, queen of foam and fermentation. The tavern became a shrine. A man once traveled from far Uruk just to drink from her bowl and pour the last sip into the soil as an offering, not for taste, for luck. And one of the oldest surviving beer hymns ends not with a prayer to Ninkosi, but to the lady who pours without spilling, whose bowl steadies the trembling hand. That's not a toast. That's theology. And here you sit now, watching her refill a stranger's cup. The man is nervous, new in town, smells like sheep and salt, but when she sets the bowl before him, he relaxes, because she's still here, still listening, still ladling grace in barley form. Not a goddess, not yet, but something divine nonetheless, because gods speak in thunder. Kubaba speaks in sips. The fireflies have begun to appear now, tiny, blinking stars drifting through the reeds at the city's edge. Kish quiets. The tavern's hearth glows low. The jug is nearly empty. And yet, as you settle back into the soft hush of evening, Kubaba's story is far from over. Tonight, the beer is sweeter. There's honey in the mix. Literal or figurative, who knows? Either way, it lingers on the tongue and loosens memory, because this is when the stories come. Not the myths, not the hymns, just the plain, sturdy tales that travel by breath alone. The kind passed between kitchen fires, across harvest rows, or under starlit courtyards. Stories without authors, but with very clear protagonists. Kubaba, and not as brewer or queen, but as something stranger, something harder to pin down. A question, really. Did she truly rule? Historians still argue whether Kubaba ever held formal office. Some believe she was elected, a rare, perhaps singular instance of a woman chosen by popular consensus to lead a city. Others argue she ruled unofficially, through persuasion, presence, and perfect pouring technique. Still others suggest the King List got it wrong altogether, and she was elevated posthumously by grateful scribes who remembered peace and needed someone to thank. There's no royal seal with her name on it, no statue carved in her likeness during her lifetime. Just stories, like this one. A band of soldiers passed through Kish one season, hungry, underpaid, restless, the kind of troop that, in other cities, ended in broken gates and burning rooftops. But in Kish, they found her tavern. She served them, said little, let them drink. By morning they left behind a token, 3 copper rings, tied with linen, a symbol of allegiance. All this, the scribe, newly assigned to tax duties, miscounted a shipment of barley, faced fines, shame, dismissal. Kubaba invited him to dinner, shared a drink, said only, everyone spills something once. By week's end, he was back at his desk. He named his daughter after her. Or this one. A rival brewer tried to discredit her, claimed she added herbs to manipulate clients, accused her of sacrilege. The temple launched an inquiry. Kubaba said nothing. She simply hosted the inquiry in her tavern, served the officials her standard brew, and watched them leave, smiling, a bit more polite than when they arrived. No charges were filed, and maybe those stories are true. Or maybe they're just Sumerian bedtime tales, soft, warm, fermented with admiration. But here's what we do know. Kubaba's name endured. It skipped over centuries, across languages, and into deification. It lingered on tablets. It wormed its way into trade records. It hung, quiet but firm, between gods and mortals. And that kind of endurance doesn't happen by accident. Something about her stuck. Maybe it was the steadiness. Maybe the silence. Maybe the way she let people talk until they heard themselves. Or maybe it was the beer. Not the drink itself, but what it stood for. A moment of peace. A pause in the shouting. A warmth shed between strangers. Quirky tidbit. In some later traditions, Kubaba was associated with doorways, thresholds, crossings, places between. That tracks. She was never quite one thing. Not fully priestess, not fully politician, not just brewer, or mother, or myth. She was the hinge on which a city turned. And you can feel it tonight in the air. Kish doesn't buzz with triumph. It hums with balance. There's no war to remember. No conquests to sing. Just decades of prosperity, cooperation, and strangely satisfied envoys. That kind of reign doesn't leave scars. It leaves recipes. And when later scribes compiled the king list, they paused at her name. They probably debated, was she really a ruler? Did she hold office? Did she deserve a line here? And then someone, likely tired, slightly buzzed, all wise beyond their ink-stained fingers, simply shrugged and wrote it in. Kubaba, the woman tavern-keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king. That was all. No explanation. No footnote. Just truth, quietly carved into clay. And you, sitting here now, bowl in hand, watching her gently wave goodbye to the last guest of the night, you understand. Power doesn't need to shout. It can whisper. It can brew. It can listen. And when it does, it becomes unforgettable. The moon is high now, casting long shadows along the temple walls, turning the city's rooftops silver and soft. The streets of Kish have emptied out, but the scent of barley mash still lingers in the air like a lullaby. You can't quite stop humming. You walk through the stillness with your thoughts trailing behind you, and they keep circling back to her, to Kubaba, to the woman who turned fermentation into philosophy, to the queen who ruled without thunder. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Kubaba didn't just leave behind influence in her own time. Her methods, her ethos, and even her beer would ripple outward far beyond the banks of the Euphrates. Because she didn't just make beer, she made a way of thinking, and people noticed. Let's talk about the women who came after her. Mainstream historical fact. In several later Mesopotamian and Anatolian cultures, women played significant roles in brewing and temple administration. In Akkad and Babylonia, Naditu priestesses managed vast temple estates, including beer production. And further west, in the Hittite Empire, a goddess named Kubaba emerged, morphing into a divine figure of sovereignty and protection. Same name, similar power. Coincidence? Historians still debate whether the Hittite Kubaba is a direct evolution of the Sumerian woman, or simply a cultural borrowing and echo passed through trade routes, myth, and migration. But the signs are there. Her name appears in city seals. Her imagery, seated, calm, cup in hand, begins to crop up in iconography centuries after her time. Even early Greek myths about powerful women bearing cups and symbols of peace have faint traces of her outline. So what happened? How did a brewer from Kish become a figure etched into cultural memory, from Turkey to Syria, to perhaps even the edges of early Greek thought? It started with exports. Not just beer, but brewing. Kubaba's methods were imitated, her brewing ceremonies replicated. Temple priestesses elsewhere began using beer as a tool for ritual diplomacy. Her practice of offering the first pour to the earth, that survived in later libation rites. Her beer bowls were copied, too. Pottery shards found as far west as ancient Ugarit resemble the wide-lipped style used in her tavern, designed for both ease of pouring and mutual sharing. Small, portable, practical, like diplomacy in clay form. And then there were the songs. Quirky tidbit. One lesser-known hymn to Ninkosi includes a line scholars translate as "Blessed be the woman whose bowl cools wrath." Some believe this was an indirect reference to Kubaba, whose brewing became so renowned that even the goddess of beer borrowed from her techniques, or at least her reputation. It gets stranger. A set of Hittite ritual texts, centuries later, includes a reference to a lady of the jug whose approval was required before initiating harvest celebrations. Her name, Kubaba. Coincidence? Maybe. But when your brewing bowls travel farther than most armies, and your peacekeeping methods leave deeper impressions than bronze swords, you start to wonder where influence ends and legend begins. And Kubaba, she never left Kish. But Kish was never small. It was a city on the move, trading goods and ideas across a network that stretched farther than even their maps could imagine. And nestled inside those caravans, between lapis and wool, cedarwood and bitumen, were tokens of her presence. Recipes, rituals, stories. They moved faster than borders, more gracefully than kings. You think about that now as you sit in the quiet of her old courtyard. The brewing vats are covered for the night. The benches have been swept. The final embers of the hearth are whispering their last sighs. And somewhere in the darkness, a girl sits cross-legged, humming a lullaby, while her grandmother tells the story of a queen who never wore a crown, but could stop a war with a bowl of foam. And the girl listens, wide-eyed, because the story doesn't end in conquest. It ends in community, in shared drinks, in the radical idea that strength might also mean gentleness. Historians still argue about her scale of impact. Some say she ruled only a district, others the entire city. A few romantics suggest her influence stretched across southern Mesopotamia, not through decree, but through respect. And that's the part you keep circling back to. She didn't invent beer. She didn't claim to be divine. She just knew how to pour, how to listen, how to wait for the right moment. And that's what people remembered. Not the battles, not the bricks, the bowl, the quiet clink of a drink passed hand to hand, stranger to stranger, until no one's name matters more than the fact that everyone's drinking from the same jug. Kubaba gave them that, and it was enough to echo. Even across empires, the wind changes that evening. A breeze rolls in from the west, drier, dustier, carrying with it the faint scent of copper and caravan oil. Something's coming. Not a storm, not quite, but a visitor. And in Kish, that means two things: questions and beer. Kubaba knows this. She's already cleaning the bowls. Today, it isn't a peace talk or a local squabble. It's a merchant from the edge of the western deserts. He's traveled weeks to reach Kish, his camels trailing shadows across the horizon. And he's not here for silver, not even for barley. He's here for method, because Kish has become famous, not just for Kubaba's beer, but for how it's brewed, how it's served, how it resolves things. And now, other cities want in. Mainstream historical fact: the spread of Sumerian culture, especially through trade, was one of the earliest forms of soft power. Cities didn't need conquest to influence their neighbors. Their language, technology, and traditions moved through exchange, marriage, and, of course, ritualized food and drink. And Kubaba's beer, it had become a symbol of trustable taste. The merchant sits stiffly at the table, his robes stiff with desert sand. He speaks in a dialect Kubaba doesn't share fluently, but that doesn't matter. She pours, gestures to drink. He does. He nods. Again, no words needed. This is how diplomacy works now. Quirky tidbit: ancient Sumerians were early adopters of the guest gift concept. Visitors often brought symbolic offerings, bowls, carvings, or exotic ingredients. In exchange, they took home methods, not just items, but ideas, brewing techniques, fermentation ratios, even prayer formulas. And that's what this merchant wants. Not a keg, a system. He wants to understand how Kubaba uses beer, not just to refresh, but to resolve. How she assigns meaning to bowls. Why she serves bitter first, then sweet. Why some meetings begin with a smaller cup than others. It's ritual, yes, but also logic. She teaches him, not with scrolls, with demonstration. She prepares 3 batches, side by side, one with barley toasted, one with added herbs, and one with water pulled from the temple's east-facing well, said to bring clarity. She lets him taste each. He takes notes on a wax tablet, grimaces at the bitter one, smiles at the herbal blend. Kubaba watches. She doesn't guide his reaction. She guides his understanding of it. And this is where export becomes legacy. Because once the merchant leaves, he'll carry more than instructions. He'll carry a philosophy that you can soothe conflict with consistency, that a shared cup can end a stalemate, that people who drink together are harder to pit against one another later. He won't copy her exactly, but he won't need to. The idea will do the work. And it's not just him. Messages begin arriving from other cities. Lagash, Umma, even distant Dilmun. Requests for grain samples, brewing implements, ratios. Words like Kubaba-style beer begin appearing on trade ledgers. One even includes a sketch of her bowl, not as a product, as a seal, a brand, if you will. One city sends back a gift, a jug painted with waves and barley stalks, with an inscription that reads, "For the Lady of Peaceful Poor." Kubaba doesn't respond. She doesn't need to, because this isn't a trademark. It's a tradition. And the idea behind it, that you can export calm, that ritual can travel, that culture can be brewed and bottled without violence, is revolutionary. Historians still debate how widespread Kubaba's influence became. Some claim she was forgotten shortly after her death, her name carried only by temple chants and scribal gossip. Others believe her methods laid the groundwork for diplomatic hospitality across the ancient world. Either way, you can trace the trail. Cities that adopted beer ceremonies often saw fewer internal disputes. Regions that valued host-guest sharing rituals were slower to erupt into conflict. Even the design of certain civic courtyards, wide open, circular, mirrors the layout of Kubaba's tavern. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe beer diplomacy worked. Because people didn't just crave drink. They craved ritual. They craved meaning. And Kubaba delivered both. Wrapped in clay and barley. Served at the perfect temperature. With just enough foam to say, "We are all human here." As the merchant departs, he bows deeper than necessary. He leaves behind a small pouch. Inside, dried desert herbs. Kubaba smells them, then stores them in a sealed jar, beside her favorite cup. Maybe she'll try a new batch next week. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't. But either way, the jug will be ready. Because somewhere in another city, someone is stirring warm water into ground grain, murmuring a prayer they half remember, trying to replicate the feeling, not the taste, but the peace of that day in Kish. And maybe they succeed. Maybe they don't. But the attempt alone, that's how cultures grow. That's how ideas move. That's how a queen becomes a ripple. You stand in the doorway now, watching her lift the jug, test the balance of the next pour. Not for trade, not for guests, for practice. Because she knows what she brews now might travel farther than she ever will. It's nearly nightfall. The lamps are being lit with slow ceremony. Reed wicks dipped in oil, glowing like fireflies trapped in clay. Kish doesn't sleep quickly. It drifts. It simmers. Even the ziggurat, towering above the rooftops, seems to hum rather than stand still. And once again, in the center of it all, Kubaba. Tonight, her tavern is quieter. Not empty, just reverent. There's a small gathering, seated in a circle around a jug. No officials, no priests, just people. A baker, a potter, a young woman with her first tattoo still healing, an older man whose sandals are more patches than leather. Kubaba doesn't serve them. She joins them. The jug is in the center. No one touches it yet. Because this isn't a meal. It's remembrance. Tonight is the anniversary of the day Kish made peace with Uma, a fragile, tense arrangement that might have collapsed had it not been for one quiet gathering, one bowl passed back and forth, one woman's ability to keep the air soft enough for listening. They're not reenacting the moment. They're honoring the habit. Because Kubaba taught something vital. That peace isn't made once. It's made again and again. Every time you choose not to raise your voice. Every time you wait before interrupting. Every time you refill someone's cup without being asked. Mainstream historical fact. Many Mesopotamian treaties included annual reaffirmation rituals, sometimes with food, often with shared drink. These ceremonies weren't just symbolic, they reset trust, re-anchored memory, reminded participants why they'd agreed in the first place. Kubaba institutionalized that, not with formal decrees, with practice, ritual, repetition. And the cup in the center tonight, it's a replica of the one from that first treaty meeting, broad-rimmed, painted with a single spiral on the base. The original sits in a temple vault now, kept safe by scribes and soothed by incense. But here, the replica does just fine. Kubaba leans forward and pours the first bowl. Then waits. A moment of silence. Then the baker drinks. Then the potter. Then the others. One by one. No speeches. No ceremony. Just a shared memory, softened by barley and time. Quirky tidbit. In Sumer, spiral patterns symbolized both eternity and return. Many bowls and tokens carried spirals at the bottom, not just as decoration, but as a quiet reminder. Everything comes back around, including trust, including betrayal, including the chance to begin again. Kubaba knew that, which is why, even in moments of celebration, she made space for grief. You see it now, in the flicker of her expression. Not sadness, just acknowledgement that some peace didn't last, that some bowls were poured for those who never returned. That beer, for all its warmth, can't solve everything, but it can soften, it can open, it can hold a place for healing, even if the wound still aches. And that's what tonight is. Not victory, just return. A recommitment to the work of being human together. It's easy to imagine how this looks from the outside. A few people drinking. No ceremony. No altar. Just bowls and breath. But from inside, it's sacred. More than most temples. Because here, belief isn't in gods. It's in each other. And in the one who poured before them. Kubaba lifts her bowl, drinks the last sip, and lets the silence settle. No applause, no announcements, just the slow lean of conversation resuming. Someone makes a joke, someone else laughs. The lamp flickers, and peace, for now, remains. Historians still argue over the legacy of these gatherings. Some claim they were private. Others say they became monthly rituals, later absorbed by temple practices. A few even argue this was the origin of civic councils, the idea that citizens could sit, and speak without hierarchy. But here now, in this room, no one's debating legacy. They're just glad she's still pouring, glad the jug hasn't gone dry, and glad that, in a world of floods and famine, and the sharp sting of bronze, someone once decided that the best kind of power was the kind that sat beside you, poured for you, listened, and waited. Kubaba doesn't speak much tonight. She doesn't have to. The cup has spoken, the spiral has turned, and peace, like beer, is still being brewed fresh, fragile, and completely worth the effort. It's nearly midnight now, and Kish is asleep. The air hangs thick and warm, soft with silence. The ziggurat looms against a moon-washed sky, and the city's pulse slows to a gentle rhythm. Breath, breeze, barley. You walk the streets one last time, tracing paths worn into the dust by centuries of bare feet and clay sandals, past shuttered market stalls, past wells still fragrant with cool water, past the outer walls, where guards murmur stories to keep themselves awake. And then, finally, back to where it all began. Kubaba's tavern. The lamps have gone out, but the door is open. You step inside, careful not to break the hush. The hearth glows faintly. The scent of toasted grain and ash clings to the walls. The floor is swept clean, except for one object, placed precisely in the center. A bowl, not full, not empty, just enough. The last pour of the night, a symbol not for guests, but for what remains after they're gone. Mainstream historical fact. In Sumerian ritual, a final offering was often left overnight, unattended, undrunk, simply resting, a gesture of continuity, of hope, of humility in the face of all that still waited beyond the firelight. And this bowl, this is Kubaba's final signature. She's not here now, or maybe she is, because in every line of clay, every swirl of the bowl's base, every barley-scented whisper that hangs in the rafters, she lingers, not as a myth, not as a ruler, but as a presence, the kind that doesn't demand worship, just remembrance. And so you sit, alone, in the quietest room in all of Kish, and you listen, not for voices, but for echoes, echoes of peace made in kitchens, of hands folded, not fists raised, of bowls passed slowly between people who once would have drawn swords, of a woman who never needed a throne because she had something better, a table, a jug, and the patience to pour again. Quirky tidbit. In later centuries, travelers visiting Kish would sometimes ask to see the Queen's cup. Most were shown a replica. A few, trusted by the temple archivists, were led into a quiet chamber where an old ceramic bowl, cracked, repaired, still marked with faint spiral carvings, sat beneath a cloth. They were told, this was hers. But that's not the only one. Many households had their own, some carved with spirals, others painted with barley stalks, all used the same way, for sharing, for settling, for remembering what mattered more than victory, harmony. You rise now, the bowl still sitting in its place. You don't touch it, you just nod, because it's enough. You step out into the night. Kish breathes around you, soft, steady, sure. And behind you, the door to the tavern swings gently closed, not with finality, but with rhythm, like the end of a pour, like the beginning of a promise. Kubaba is gone, but the jug remains, and every time someone chooses patience over pride, silence over shouting, listening over loudness, a bit of her legacy lives again. In kitchens, in marketplaces, in courtyards at dusk, and maybe, just maybe, in the way you raise your next cup. Wind down 300 words. Now breathe. Let your body ease into stillness. Let the weight of the story soften behind your eyes. You've traveled far tonight, not across miles, but through time, through ritual, through the slow, steady pour of a woman who understood something too many rulers forget. That power doesn't always come from being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to pass the bowl, from seeing not what people demand, but what they need, from brewing peace slowly, letting it settle, letting it rise. Kubaba's legacy wasn't carved into conquest. It was folded into habit. It was remembered not because it shook empires, but because it soothed them, because it showed another way, a softer way, one that asked not, who is right, but how can we share? Tonight may you carry that with you, not just the history, but the feeling of warmth in the cup, of gentleness at the table, of the quiet faith that even in noisy times, calm can be made, care can be brewed, and maybe, just maybe, tomorrow begins with a pause and a pour. So let your breath settle, let your thoughts spiral gently, and let the silence of a tavern long gone guide you into rest. End of script. Sweet dreams. Hey guys, Tonight we drift far beyond the now, past skyscrapers, streetlights, and speed limits, until we land gently in the cradle of civilization. The land is dry, the rivers are wild, and your sandals are full of dust. You squint beneath a low Sumerian sun, and hear it before you see it. Laughter, music, the soft clink of ceramic cups, and the deep, unmistakable glug of beer being poured. Yes, that kind of beer. Tonight, you're stepping into ancient Kish, where taverns shape treaties, and the most powerful leader on record isn't a king, but a queen, with a jug of foamy diplomacy under her arm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk down a dusty path lined with reed houses and smell the yeast before anything else. Earthy, pungent, alive. Barley's been soaking in water all morning. Bread loaves, half-baked and crumbled, float in large clay pots where fermentation is already doing its bubbly work. This isn't just a drink. It's an offering, a ritual, a currency, and tonight, it's the tool of a queen. But she's not called that yet. Right now, she's just a woman behind a wooden counter, ladling beer into shallow bowls for merchants, messengers, and the occasional off-duty priest who insists he's only tasting for temple purity. Her name is Kubaba, and if you're lucky, she might pour you a cup laced with honey and a hint of mint, lean across the counter, and change the entire course of your city's political future. Because that's the thing about beer in ancient Sumer. It wasn't just a beverage. It was a binder, a smoother, a peacekeeper in a clay jar. This is around 2500 BCE. Give or take a few suspicious calendar adjustments. Cities like Kish, Uruk, and Lagash are competing for dominance. Trade routes crisscross the landscape like thread. Gods have temples, kings have egos, and beer has power. Mainstream fact: the oldest known written recipe in the world is for beer. Cuneiform tablets from Sumer describe the ingredients, process, and rituals involved. It wasn't just about refreshment. It was sacred, tied to the goddess Ninkasi, who was essentially the Beyonk of brewing. But here's the twist. Brewing wasn't dominated by men, not even close. In Sumer, women brewed. They brewed at home. They brewed for the temples. They brewed in public houses that doubled as gathering places, negotiation halls, and, as in Kubaba's case, early state departments. So when you step into her tavern, it's not like walking into a medieval alehouse. There are no rowdy bards or swinging chandeliers. This place hums. The walls are mud brick and cool. The floor's been swept with a rush broom. Low tables are set with reed mats. And in the corner, a scribe cuffs something into a clay tablet, glancing up every so often to see who's drinking with whom. Because everything here matters. Who shares a drink? Who refills whose cup? Who laughs too loudly? Who never touches their bowl? Beer is watching. And Kubaba is watching too. She's not young, not old, just permanent. Like she's always been here. Like she knows your favorite mix before you've even sat down. And while her smile is soft, her eyes keep track of the tensions that others try to drown in barley foam. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Sumerian beer was so thick, people drank it with straws. Long, hollow reeds that doubled as status symbols. The fancier the straw, the more important you were. And if someone offered you theirs, that was basically an alliance proposal. Kubaba. She has the nicest straw in the room, woven with gold thread. A gift maybe, from a city governor who wanted favorable treatment in a land dispute. She uses it sparingly. Tonight, a traveling envoy has just arrived. He's dust-covered, sunburned, and clearly annoyed that he's not been offered the good beer yet. Kubaba smiles, gestures to a bench, and sends over a bowl, just warm enough to release the scent of barley and smoke. No need for words. He'll wait. Everyone does. And here's the cheeky historical question. How did she get here? How does a tavern-keeper, likely of modest means and uncertain lineage, eventually become Queen of Kish, the only woman ever listed in the Sumerian King List? Historians still argue whether she actually ruled, or if her name was added as posthumous flattery. Some suggest she was a regent. Others insist she was mythologized after death. But the records don't lie. Her name appears, alone, singular, sober. Kubaba, the woman tavern-keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king. Yes, king, because the word for ruler didn't have a feminine form. But don't let the grammar fool you. She wielded power, and it started here, with beer. You sip from your own bowl now, the barley tang settling behind your teeth, and glance around. Deals are being made. Disputes are being dissolved. Kubaba moves from table to table, pouring, listening, smiling just enough. You might not survive the water in Sumer, but you'd be foolish not to trust the beer, especially hers. The tavern door doesn't creak, it sighs. Clay and wood don't age silently in Sumer. They settle like old bones under the weight of time. You're back inside, seated at the edge of a worn bench, watching the woman who doesn't yet call herself queen, but might as well. Kubaba moves like someone who already knows how the conversation will end. She doesn't hurry. She doesn't command. She simply fills. Bowls. Silences. Tensions. Every gesture is an invitation to breathe. Even when her customers come armed with swords, scrolls, or stress, they somehow leave with slightly more clarity and slightly less vinegar in their blood. Her tavern isn't large, just a single long room with one hearth, 2 storage jars, and a back storeroom that might also double as a sleeping mat. There are no windows, just 2 wide openings near the ceiling for light and breeze, and a tiny shrine to Ninkosi set into a niche near the back wall. A reed doll stands inside it, arms raised as if in permanent toast. The scent inside? Earthy, sharp, sweet like soggy bread left too long in the sun. Only this time, it's intentional. Let's talk about the beer itself. Mainstream historical fact. Sumerian beer wasn't filtered. It was cloudy, grainy, and came in more textures than you might expect from a liquid. Some versions were porridge thick. Others were more like broth. Most required straws. Yes, drinking your way to the bottom required both patience and upper body strength. And the fermentation process, delightfully improvised. The standard method involved crumbling loaves of half-baked bread, called papir, into water, letting it sit in large clay vessels, and stirring it with whatever clean stick you had on hand. Add dates for sweetness, or honey, if you were flush that week. Kubaba's version is better. That's the general consensus among her regulars. She uses toasted barley. She infuses herbs. And she ages it just long enough to give it an edge without tipping over into vinegar. If beer were music, hers would be a lullaby with a knife tucked under the chorus. Which is why her tavern has become more than a place to drink. It's become a place to think. You glance at the table to your left. A merchant from Adab is negotiating with a temple scribe from Logos. Their conversation is tense, but civil, mostly because Kubaba is pouring their refills herself. Every time a voice rises, she arrives with a ladle. Every time a fist twitches, she offers a sweetened bowl. And slowly, the tempo drops. The shoulders relax. The deal begins to take shape. This is her gift. And it's not just charisma. It's architecture. The tavern is arranged so that rivals sit close, but not too close. The corner table is reserved for those with something to hide. The stool near the door is for those in a hurry to storm back out. Every seat has a purpose. Every pour, a message. Here's a quirky detail. Some scholars believe ancient taverns were one of the few places where classes mingled. Unlike temples or palaces, a beer house didn't care if you wore silk or rags, only that you could pay. And sometimes, not even that. Kubaba ran hers like a social algorithm. Farmers, traders, priests, scribes, couriers. You could find them all here. And if you watched long enough, you'd notice how she paired people. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Like stirring honey into warm liquid, everyone eventually dissolves into the mix. You lean forward, noticing a young man nervously fingering a clay token. He's new, probably a messenger, maybe carrying news from Kubaba steps near, sets down a bowl, and says nothing, just looks at him, long enough for him to lower the token, sip his beer, and decide to wait until tomorrow to deliver his message. Power, wielded gently. Outside, the streets of Kish buzz with activity. Oxen bray, priests chant, traders argue over copper. But inside, the tavern hums differently. It's slower, softer, safer. Kubaba doesn't need guards. She has hospitality, which in this era is practically divine law. Hospitality in Sumer was sacred. Deny someone water, and you might as well spit in Enlil's face. Offer someone bread and beer, and you established more than goodwill. You established contract. Real contracts, too. Deals could be sealed with a shared bowl more effectively than a stamped tablet. That's why Kubaba's place matters, because if you make the beer, and you control who shares it, then you get to decide which alliances form, and which fall apart before they ever solidify. Historians still debate whether Kubaba's tavern was officially sanctioned by the temple, or whether she simply built her network out of nothing but barley and nerve. Some say she had powerful friends early on. Others believe she gained influence one bowl at a time. Either way, her reputation grew. Envoys began to request her by name. Messages arrived asking, "Is the tavern woman available to mediate?" Rival leaders sent gifts. A governor once tried to send her gold. She returned it with a note carved on a piece of driftwood. Send clean jars instead. Iconic. And that's how it started. Not with bloodlines, not with conquest, but with conversation, with foam, with ritual. You sip again. The bowl is warm now. The last of the barley has settled into the bottom in a soft cloud. Outside, Kish glows gold under the setting sun. But here in this room, time has slowed. Voices have softened, and a woman with a straw woven from river reeds is rewriting what power looks like, one pour at a time.